What if the scream you hear at an amusement park isn't excitement, but pure terror? Beneath the neon lights and cheerful music, something far darker has unfolded more times than anyone wants to admit. Rides designed for joy have turned into nightmares in seconds. A single malfunction, one overlooked warning, one fatal mistake, and suddenly the thrill becomes something no one survives the same way. Tonight, we're pulling back the curtain on the chilling reality behind amusement park disasters that left the world stunned, and asking the question no one dares to what really happens when the ride doesn't stop. The Quimera Disaster 2019. On September 28, 2019, crowds gathered at La Feria Chapultepec Mágico, a historic amusement park located in Mexico City. The park had entertained visitors for decades, and one of its most well-known attractions was a steel roller coaster called Chimera. The ride was an older triple-loop coaster, originally built years earlier, but it still drew long lines of thrill-seekers eager to experience its powerful drops and loops. That afternoon, a train full of riders began its normal journey along the track. The coaster rushed through its loops and turns as passengers screamed in excitement. As the ride approached the final section of track near the end of the course, witnesses began to notice something strange. The rear car of the train started shaking violently as it entered a curve. Within seconds, the situation turned catastrophic. The last car suddenly derailed and flipped upside down, completely separating from the rest of the train. 2 passengers were thrown from the car as it fell nearly 33 feet to the ground below. The victims, 2 young men aged 18 and 21, suffered severe head injuries and died shortly afterward. 2 women riding in the car were also seriously injured when the wreckage slammed into the coaster structure. The shocking accident immediately forced authorities to shut down the entire amusement park. Investigators later discovered that a critical component inside the axle assembly had broken, causing the wheels to detach from the track. Officials also uncovered multiple safety violations during the investigation. Within months, La Feria Chapultepec lost its operating permit, and the historic amusement park was permanently closed and dismantled. The Mindbender Disaster, 1986. Rod Chico. On June 14, 1986, the West Edmonton Mall in Alberta, Canada, was packed with visitors enjoying one of the largest indoor amusement parks in the world. At the center of the park stood Mindbender, a massive steel roller coaster, famous for its 3 vertical loops and speeds reaching nearly 60 miles per hour. The ride had passed a safety inspection just the day before, and no one inside the mall had any reason to believe something was about to go terribly wrong. That evening, Rod Chico and 3 of his friends climbed into the last car of the train. The coaster launched from the station and quickly built speed as it raced toward the first loop. The train smoothly completed the first and second loops while riders screamed in excitement. But as the train entered the third and final loop, a critical mechanical failure suddenly occurred. 4 small cap screws in the wheel assembly of the last car had slowly loosened over time. Under the intense forces of the loop, those screws finally failed. The rear car began to shake violently as its wheels lost contact with the track. Within seconds, the car completely derailed. The lap bar restraints suddenly released, throwing all 4 passengers from the car. They were launched nearly 30 feet through the air before crashing onto the hard concrete floor of the amusement park below. The train itself, slowed by the derailment, rolled backward and slammed into a concrete support pillar. When rescue teams arrived, 3 passengers were already dead. Rod Chico somehow survived, but his injuries were catastrophic. Both of his legs were shattered, along with multiple ribs, his shoulder, pelvis, and lower back. The impact had folded his body nearly in half. Chico spent months in recovery learning how to walk again, while investigators uncovered serious design flaws and poor maintenance that had allowed the tragedy to happen. The Big Dipper disaster, 1930. On July 24, 1930, Krug Park in Omaha, Nebraska was packed with visitors escaping the summer heat. Families, couples, and teenagers filled the park, eager to experience its most famous attraction, a towering wooden roller coaster known as the Big Dipper. The ride was simple but thrilling. 4 cars were connected in a train and pulled slowly up the first hill before gravity sent the riders racing down the track through sharp turns and sudden drops. That afternoon, 23 passengers climbed aboard the coaster. Among them were Gladys Lundgren, C.H. Stout, Anthony Politica, and a 15-year-old girl named Ruth Frell. As the train began its slow climb up the first hill, everything seemed completely normal. The wooden structure creaked, as it had done for years, and the riders waited for the exciting drop ahead. But hidden inside the braking mechanism, a small mechanical problem had already begun to form. A single bolt had worked loose, jamming part of the braking system and locking one of the wheels in place. As the train moved forward, the locked wheel forced the first car off the track. Without warning, the front car suddenly jumped, the rails smashed through the guardrail and plunged nearly 35 feet to the ground. The remaining 3 cars were violently dragged off the track behind it. Passengers were thrown from their seats or crushed beneath the wreckage as the cars collapsed onto the ground below. The crash sent shockwaves through the crowded park. When the chaos finally ended, 4 people were dead and 19 others were seriously injured. Thousands of horrified spectators rushed toward the wreckage, unintentionally blocking emergency crews from reaching the victims, turning the scene into one of the most devastating roller coaster disasters in American history. The Matterhorn Bobsleds tragedy, 1984. Dolly Young. On January 3, 1984, Disneyland in California was filled with visitors enjoying what was supposed to be a joyful day at one of the world's most famous theme parks. Families walked through the park while music played and roller coasters roared in the distance. Towering above many of the attractions was the artificial snow-covered peak of the Matterhorn, home to one of Disneyland's most iconic rides, the Matterhorn Bobsleds. The ride sent small, sled-shaped cars racing through dark tunnels inside the mountain at speeds of more than 40 miles per hour. Among the guests that day was 48-year-old Dolly Young, who had come to the park with 5 friends. When they reached the ride, Young boarded a sled alone while her friends sat in another sled on the parallel track. The ride began normally as the sleds climbed into the mountain before plunging into the twisting tunnels inside. Somewhere during the ride, something went terribly wrong. Young somehow fell out of her bobsled and landed directly on the track, deep inside the dark tunnel. Moments later, another sled approached from behind at high speed. The riders inside briefly noticed a figure lying ahead, but assumed it was part of the ride, possibly a prop placed along the track. It was not. The sled struck Young at full speed, killing her instantly. The ride operators only realized something was wrong when her empty bobsled returned to the station, triggering an immediate shutdown of the attraction. The tragedy shocked both witnesses and park officials, becoming one of the most disturbing accidents ever recorded at Disneyland. The Wild Wonder tragedy, 1999. Kimberly Bailey and Jessica Bailey. On August 28, 1999, the famous boardwalk in Ocean City, New Jersey, was glowing with lights as crowds filled the rides at Gillian's Wonderland Pier. The smell of food, the sound of games, and the laughter of families created the perfect summer atmosphere. Among the visitors that evening were Kimberly Bailey and her 8-year-old daughter Jessica, who had come to enjoy the attractions together. One of the rides they chose was a small steel roller coaster known as Wild Wonder. Compared to larger theme park coasters, it looked harmless. The ride used single cars that were slowly pulled up a 40-foot lift hill before gravity sent them racing through a short but thrilling track. Bailey and Jessica climbed into one of the cars and secured the safety bar as the ride began its slow climb toward the top. But hidden inside the mechanism of the coaster, a serious problem was about to reveal itself. As their car approached the top of the hill, the anti-rollback safety device suddenly failed. Without the device holding the car in place, it lost contact with the lift chain and began rolling backward down the steep track. Within seconds, the car picked up speed as it rushed toward the station below. Riders and operators had almost no time to react. The car slammed violently into the loading area at the bottom of the hill, throwing Kimberly Bailey and young Jessica from their seats. Both mother and daughter died instantly. Investigators later discovered that the park had replaced the original anti-rollback mechanism with an unapproved, locally made part, and that faulty component failed when it was needed most. The Derby Racer Tragedy, 1911 to 1936. In 1911, a new roller coaster called Derby Racer opened at Revere Beach in Massachusetts. The ride was designed to be exciting and different from anything people had seen before. It featured 2 parallel tracks where trains raced side by side in a large figure-8 pattern. Passengers would sit in open cars and hold on as the trains sped around sharp curves and steep hills. But there was one major problem. The ride had no safety restraints, no reliable speed control, and very little protection for riders. Not long after the coaster opened, the first tragedy occurred. A passenger was thrown from his car during a turn and died from the fall. Despite the fatal accident, the ride continued operating after only minor changes. Later that same year, another shocking death happened. The company's own treasurer climbed onto the ride to lecture passengers about safety. While standing up inside the moving car, he suddenly lost his balance and was violently thrown from the coaster, killing him instantly. Even after these incidents, Derby Racer remained open. Over the years, more accidents continued to happen. One of the most disturbing occurred in 1917. During a ride, a man lost his hat and attempted to retrieve it while the train was still moving. He slipped out of his car on a steep incline and fell onto the adjacent track. Seconds later, the other racing train struck him at full speed. The impact was so severe that nearly every bone in his body was broken. He died shortly afterward. Despite multiple deaths and numerous injuries, the dangerous ride continued operating for decades before finally closing in 1936, leaving behind a reputation as one of the most hazardous roller coasters ever built. The Rough Riders Disaster, 1910 to 1915. In 1910, a new roller coaster called Rough Riders opened at the famous Coney Island Amusement District in New York. At the time, roller coasters were still relatively new attractions, and safety standards were far less developed than they are today. Rough Riders used an electric-powered system where a motorman controlled the speed of the train with a throttle as it raced along the wooden track. Riders simply sat in open cars and held on while the train rushed through steep hills and sharp turns. Not long after the ride opened, the first major disaster struck. As the train moved through a sharp curve, it suddenly derailed, sending chaos through the ride. 17 passengers were thrown from the track when the cars left the rails. When the wreckage was finally cleared, 3 people had died and many others were seriously injured. Despite the tragedy, the ride was repaired and returned to operation after only minor improvements. But the danger was far from over. 5 years later, on July 27, 1915, another devastating accident occurred. 6 passengers boarded the Rough Riders train for what should have been a routine ride. As the coaster sped down a steep incline, it approached a tight curve at high speed. The motorman failed to slow the train enough before entering the turn. The wheels suddenly left the track, and the car flipped violently onto its side nearly 30 feet in the air. Riders were thrown from the car and slammed into iron railings before crashing to the ground below. 3 passengers died from the fall, while others clung to the damaged car until rescuers arrived. After 2 deadly disasters that claimed 6 lives, the Rough Riders coaster was finally shut down and dismantled, becoming one of the earliest examples of the dangers of poorly regulated amusement rides. The Fujin Raijin II disaster, 2007. Yoshino Kogawara. On May 5, 2007, Expoland Amusement Park in Osaka, Japan, was packed with families celebrating Children's Day, one of the country's busiest holidays. Long lines formed in front of the park's biggest attractions, including a towering stand-up roller coaster called Fujin Raijin II. The ride carried passengers high above the park, before racing through fast drops and sharp turns. That afternoon, 20 riders boarded the 6-car train, including 19-year-old university student Yoshino Kogawara. The ride began normally as the train climbed the lift hill and accelerated into its course. Riders laughed and screamed as the coaster rushed along the elevated track more than 130 feet above the ground. But suddenly, a loud cracking sound echoed through the structure. Something inside the train had failed. One of the wheel axles on the second car suddenly snapped, a result of severe metal fatigue that had gone unnoticed for years. Without the axle holding the wheels in place, the car violently derailed and tilted sideways as it continued moving along the track. The out-of-control car slammed into the guardrail at high speed. Kogawara was thrown against the structure and suffered fatal head injuries instantly. The damaged car dragged along the track for nearly 1,000 feet before the train finally came to a stop. 19 other passengers were injured during the terrifying incident. The investigation that followed revealed shocking negligence. The axle that failed had not been replaced for 15 years, and the park had skipped its scheduled maintenance inspection earlier that year. Engineers concluded that proper testing would have easily detected the crack before the accident occurred. After the tragedy, attendance at Expoland collapsed, and the park eventually closed permanently in 2009. The Son of Beast. Incidents 2000 to 2009. In the year 2000, Kings Island Amusement Park in Ohio unveiled what was supposed to be a record-breaking attraction. The ride was called Son of Beast, a massive wooden roller coaster designed to push the limits of speed and size. Reaching speeds of nearly 78 miles per hour, it was one of the fastest wooden coasters ever built. From the moment it opened, thousands of thrill-seekers lined up to experience its towering drops and intense twists. But almost immediately, problems began to appear. Riders started reporting that the coaster felt unusually rough and violent compared to other rides. The wooden structure shook heavily as the trains raced through the track. In 2001, several riders suffered serious injuries, including broken vertebrae and a broken neck. 2 years later, another passenger was hospitalized with severe back injuries after riding the coaster. The most alarming incident happened on July 9, 2006. That day, 27 passengers were riding the coaster when a train passed through a section of track known as the Rose Bowl. During the ride, a support beam inside the wooden structure cracked, weakening the track above it. When the next train reached the damaged section, the track suddenly sagged downward under the weight of the train. The sudden drop created a brutal jolt that riders later described as feeling like slamming into a wall. All 27 passengers were rushed to hospitals with injuries to their necks and chests. Investigators later discovered multiple cracked and splintered support beams throughout the structure. Although the ride briefly reopened after modifications, another serious injury occurred in 2009. After years of problems and accidents, Son of Beast was permanently closed and demolished in 2012. The Cobra accident, 2022. In 2008, a roller coaster called Cobra opened at Tivoli Friheden Amusement Park in Aarhus, Denmark. The ride quickly became one of the park's most popular attractions. Its compact design sent trains racing through sharp turns and quick drops while riders were tightly secured in rows of seats. For many visitors, it was a thrilling but relatively short ride that delivered a burst of adrenaline within seconds. However, only months after opening, the coaster experienced its first serious problem. During one ride, the front car detached from the track, injuring 4 young riders who suffered fractures and concussions. After repairs and inspections, the park allowed Cobra to reopen, assuring visitors that the issue had been fixed. For more than a decade, the ride continued operating, but the underlying structural weakness had never truly disappeared. Then, on July 14, 2022, disaster struck again. As the train moved through the track, riders suddenly felt a violent jolt and heard the sound of cracking metal. In a horrifying moment, the rear section of the train broke away from the track. The last row of seats detached and hung dangerously off the side of the coaster structure. One of the passengers, a 14-year-old girl, was thrown from the ride and suffered fatal injuries. Next to her, a 13-year-old boy survived but suffered a severe hand injury. Park staff quickly shut down the ride and evacuated the area, but the tragedy had already claimed a life. Investigators later discovered that the same type of structural flaw had caused both the earlier accident and the fatal one. The park dismantled the Cobra coaster the very next day, permanently closing the ride after 14 years of operation. The Batman Tragedy, 2008. Asia Lean Ferguson. On June 28, 2008, Six Flags Over Georgia was packed with visitors enjoying a hot summer day. The sound of screaming riders and roaring roller coasters echoed across the park. Among the crowd was 17-year-old Asia Lean Ferguson, who had come with his family and a group from his church. Like many teenagers that day, he was excited to ride the Batman, one of the park's most intense attractions. The inverted roller coaster sent riders flying through tight turns and loops, while their legs dangled freely beneath the track at speeds close to 50 miles per hour. During the ride, Ferguson's hat suddenly flew off his head and vanished somewhere below the track. At first, it seemed like a small and harmless moment, but after the ride ended, Ferguson decided he wanted it back. The hat had landed in a restricted maintenance area directly beneath the roller coaster. Warning signs clearly marked the area as off-limits, and 2 6-foot fences surrounded the zone to keep visitors out. Ignoring the danger, Ferguson climbed over both fences and stepped into the restricted space, searching the ground for his missing hat. Above him, another train was already racing through the track with passengers screaming in excitement. The coaster approached at nearly 50 miles per hour, while Ferguson stood directly below it. He never looked up. In a split second, a rider's dangling foot struck Ferguson in the head with devastating force. Witnesses watched in horror as the train continued toward the station, leaving one of the most shocking amusement park tragedies behind. The Dodonpa Disaster, 1972. On May 30, 1972, A warm afternoon in London Battersea Fun Fair was overflowing with visitors. Schools had just begun their half-term break, and families filled the park looking for excitement. One of the most popular attractions was the wooden roller coaster known as the Big Dipper, a ride that had been operating since 1951. It looked simple compared to modern coasters, just 3 connected cars pulled up a steep hill by a steel cable before gravity took over. But that afternoon, something inside the aging ride was about to fail. Around 2:30 p.m., 31 passengers, most of them children and teenagers, climbed aboard the train. At the very front sat a brakeman, whose job was to manually control the braking system during the ride. The train slowly climbed the steep lift hill as riders laughed and shouted in excitement. Then suddenly, disaster struck. The haulage rope snapped. For a brief second, the train paused at the top of the hill, balanced between gravity and steel. Then it began rolling backwards. The brakeman desperately lunged for the brake lever, but nothing happened. The braking system failed to respond. The safety mechanisms that should have stopped a rollback were either broken or missing. With nothing to slow it down, the train accelerated backwards down the steep incline. By the time it reached the bottom curve, the train was moving far faster than the wooden track was designed to handle. The first car jumped the rails, smashed through the barrier, and plunged 15 feet to the ground. The remaining cars followed violently behind it. Passengers were thrown from their seats as the wreckage collapsed around them. When the chaos finally stopped, 5 children were dead, and 13 others were seriously injured, turning a joyful holiday afternoon into one of Britain's most devastating amusement park disasters. The hidden dangers of roller coasters. Roller coasters, nothing compares to the thrill they provide. The wind in your face, the stomach-churning drops, and the insane loops that leave you breathless. It's the ultimate rush. But what if that rush hides a dangerous truth? What if each thrilling ride comes with a dark side you've never considered? In 2016, 2 doctors, Mark Mitchell and David Wartinger, set out to prove a chilling theory. They 3 deprinted a transparent kidney and placed a stone inside. Their goal, to see if a roller coaster could shake the stone loose. They rode Disney World's Big Thunder Mountain Railroad 20 times, each time analyzing the effects of the ride's intense forces. The results, startling. In 2/3 of the attempts, the stone was expelled. This was no isolated incident. A ride so powerful it could shake a stone out of a kidney. If that's what it can do to a fake organ, imagine what it's doing to your body. These extreme forces aren't something to ignore. The same force that dislodged a stone from a 3D printed kidney can have devastating consequences for your spine bones and organs. And most riders are completely unaware of the damage they might be taking on with each twist and turn. Roller coasters are designed to thrill, but the price of that thrill could be far steeper than anyone realizes. The Dodonpa roller coaster. Tragedy, the price of adrenaline. Imagine this: you're strapping in for the ride of your life on one of the world's most intense roller coasters, the Dodonpa at Fuji-Q Highland Park in Japan. This isn't just any ride. In just 1.5 seconds, it accelerates to 180 kilometers per hour, sending your heart racing, your stomach dropping, and your senses spiraling into pure adrenaline. It promises an experience unlike any other, a test of courage and excitement. But what happens next might make you question whether the thrill is worth the risk. In 2020, a woman took her chance on this beast of a ride. She felt the exhilarating rush, the electrifying speed, the twists and turns that seemed to defy the laws of physics. But hours later, something went terribly wrong. The pain hit her like a freight train, severe neck and chest discomfort, that couldn't be ignored. She rushed to the hospital, where doctors revealed a nightmare fractures in her neck and chest. What caused this horror? The same forces that made her heart race and her hair stand on end, the extreme acceleration of the ride. It was a high-speed crash, only without the car wreck. But the worst part, the park did nothing. They didn't shut the ride down. They didn't issue a warning. Instead, they claimed her spine was simply too weak to withstand the ride's intensity. No responsibility, no accountability, just another rider paying the price for a ride that was too extreme to handle. And it didn't end there. A year later, another rider got on the Dodonpa, braving the same terrifying acceleration. This time, the consequences were just as dire: a severe spinal injury, the same forces wreaking havoc on his body. It took multiple accidents before the park finally decided to close the ride, but by then the damage was already done. The real question remains, how many more people would have to suffer before the park acknowledged the danger? The Dodonpa roller coaster tragedy serves as a chilling reminder of the true cost of seeking thrills. How much are we really willing to risk for a few minutes of excitement? The danger is clear, but for too long, amusement parks have prioritized profits over the safety of their visitors. And while they continue to market these rides as the ultimate adrenaline rush, the real price of that thrill is becoming harder to ignore. The Smiler roller coaster disaster, a date that turned into a nightmare. You've heard the phrase, the thrill of the ride, but what happens when that thrill goes horribly wrong? In 2015, Leah Washington and her boyfriend Joe Pugh found themselves in the middle of one of the most shocking roller coaster disasters ever. They had no idea that a fun date at Alton Towers, an amusement park in the UK, would soon become a life-altering experience. The couple was excited to board the Smiler, a roller coaster famous for its 14 loops and exhilarating drops. After waiting for hours in line, they were finally strapped in, ready for an adventure. But what started as an ordinary ride soon turned into an unforgettable nightmare. At the peak of a 27-meter drop, the ride suddenly came to a screeching halt. At first, Leah thought it was just a temporary glitch. But then, without warning, the ride lurched forward and collided with another stalled car on the track. The force of the impact pinned Leah's legs between the safety bar and the other car. In an instant, she lost feeling in her left leg. Emergency responders rushed to the scene and Leah was taken to the hospital, where she woke up the next day to discover the unthinkable: most of her left leg had been amputated. Joe, her boyfriend, was left with shattered kneecaps and broken fingers. What caused this horrific accident? A computer glitch that stopped the ride, and a crucial mistake by an engineer who mistakenly restarted it, causing the collision. Alton Towers was fined £5 million and covered Leah's medical bills, but no amount of money could undo the trauma Leah would carry for the rest of her life. What was meant to be a fun, exciting date had turned into a nightmare that forever changed their lives. The terrifying thing is that these kinds of accidents don't just happen once; they can happen anywhere at any time. While the Smiler was shut down after the tragedy, the events at Alton Towers raised a disturbing question: how many more rides are out there just waiting for the next victim to step aboard? The M&D's theme park roller coaster nightmare. A horrifying fall. Imagine a day at the amusement park, a place filled with laughter, excitement, and the promise of unforgettable fun. But for one family in 2016, what was supposed to be a carefree outing at M&D's theme park in Scotland turned into a horrifying scene of terror. Paul McFadden was enjoying a day at the park when he suddenly heard a loud, ear-splitting noise. The sound was followed by screams of panic. He turned around, only to witness a nightmare unfold before his eyes. A roller coaster car had derailed and plummeted 9 meters, crashing into a nearby children's ride. Chaos erupted as people scrambled for safety. In the aftermath, 8 children and 2 adults were severely injured, many of them left with broken bones and deep lacerations. What caused this horrific accident? The roller coaster's sharp turns and faulty mechanics were believed to have led to the derailment, but no one could have predicted the sheer terror that would follow. The sight of a roller coaster car dangling helplessly, its passengers in peril, is something no one should ever have to see. Despite the gravity of the situation, the park remained open, and the roller coaster was eventually repaired and put back into operation. It's chilling to think that after such a catastrophic incident, the same ride was allowed to operate again. What does this say about the park's priorities? Profit over safety. The M&D's disaster serves as a grim reminder that the thrill of a roller coaster can come with a terrifying price. As we chase the next adrenaline rush, we must ask ourselves how many more lives will be shattered before amusement parks finally take action to put safety first. The danger is real, and it's only a matter of time before the next tragedy strikes. The Superman Tower of Power. A deadly freefall. When you think of thrills, you think of heart-stopping rides like the Superman Tower of Power at Six Flags Kentucky Kingdom. Standing 54 meters tall, this ride shoots you to the sky at speeds of 87 kilometers per hour, leaving you breathless as you soar higher and higher, only to come crashing back down in a freefall descent. It promises the ultimate adrenaline rush, but for one 13-year-old girl, that rush turned into a horrifying nightmare. On June 21, 2007, Caitlin Lasser and her friend hopped on the Superman Tower of Power for what they thought would be just another exhilarating ride. But this time something went terribly wrong. As the ride reached the peak, a strange noise like a whip cracking echoed through the air. Then everything started to shake. Cables once secure began falling. The ride continued to descend, but Caitlin and her friend weren't laughing anymore. They were screaming for help. Moments later, disaster struck. Cables wrapped around Caitlin's legs, and within seconds, her life was changed forever. The malfunction caused the cables to severely crush both of her lower legs. Doctors were able to save her right leg, but Caitlin's left leg had to be amputated. The cause of the incident: faulty maintenance. The park operators had failed to properly maintain the cables, and they had mistakenly applied cornstarch to them instead of the recommended cotton rag to prevent slippage. But the tragedy didn't stop there. Even worse, the ride operator had been on the phone during the malfunction, delaying the emergency stop. This horrifying event begs the question: how can we trust these rides when maintenance is so easily overlooked? What happened to safety over thrill? Caitlin's life was changed forever, but the park didn't seem to learn from their mistake. While these rides continue to operate, Caitlin's tragedy serves as a chilling reminder that the cost of excitement can be more than anyone ever expects. The Drop Tower Disaster, the ride that went wrong. There's nothing quite like the feeling of plummeting toward the ground at high speed, the ultimate rush for thrill seekers. The Drop Tower at Great America Amusement Park in Santa Clara, California, promises just that: a drop from 63 meters with speeds reaching up to 97 kilometers per hour. It's one of those rides that tests your limits, giving you a brief moment of freefall that feels like eternity. But for 12-year-old Joshua Smurfett, what was supposed to be a fun thrill turned into a tragedy that no one could have predicted. On August 23, 1999, Joshua boarded the Drop Tower with his family, excited for the ride that would send him soaring to the sky. But as the ride began to ascend, something went horribly wrong. When it reached the top, the safety bar that was supposed to hold Joshua in place unexpectedly lifted. As the ride dropped, he was sent flying forward, eventually tumbling out of the seat. In a horrifying twist, Joshua fell headfirst and landed on the ground, tragically passing away from the impact. The cause of this devastating accident was a malfunction with the safety restraint system. Witnesses reported that the staff had failed to properly check the safety restraints before the ride started. But what's even more chilling is that this wasn't just an isolated failure. It was a glaring oversight that led to a young boy's death right before the eyes of his family. How could something so horrifying happen on a ride designed to thrill? What went wrong in the safety protocols that allowed a child to fall out? Joshua's death is a tragic reminder of how a simple mistake can lead to irreversible consequences. And even more unsettling, why did it take such a tragedy to expose the glaring flaws in ride safety? It's a wake-up call for all amusement parks. Safety should always come before thrill. The River Rapids tragedy, a fun ride turned fatal. It seemed like the perfect day for a family outing. Sun-shining smiles all around, and a classic amusement park experience on the River Rapids ride at Drayton Manor Park in the UK. The ride, known for its gentle twists and splashes, was meant to be a fun, safe way for families to cool off and enjoy each other's company. But for 11-year-old Eva Janeth, this seemingly innocent ride would turn into a tragic story that would haunt everyone involved. On May 9, 2017, Eva joined her classmates for a school trip, and like so many before her, she eagerly jumped into a 6-person inflatable boat. But during the ride, something went horribly wrong. Eva decided to swap seats with another child, and that small movement caused the boat to tilt dangerously. Within seconds, the boat flipped over, and Eva was thrown into the water. The water wasn't deep, but it was enough to trap her. Visitors around her heard the horrifying sound of a scream as Eva went under, unable to surface due to the boat's position and the strong current pulling her down. Despite the quick rescue efforts, it was too late. Eva's life was tragically lost in just a few moments. What makes this story even more chilling is that this wasn't the first time something had gone wrong on similar rides. In fact, just a few years earlier, Eva's mother, Vicky Tracy, had witnessed her own son, Patrick, almost drown on a similar ride at the same park. Thankfully, Patrick was saved, but this wasn't enough to prompt serious action. Despite the previous near-fatal incident, Drayton Manor failed to make necessary safety upgrades, which would have prevented Eva's tragedy. This heartbreaking incident begs a disturbing question: how many more tragedies will it take before amusement parks take their responsibility seriously? How many more families will be forced to live with the unimaginable pain of losing a loved one, all because the park failed to prioritize safety over profit? The World Carnival Ferris Wheel Disaster 2007. A family's tragic fall. Amusement parks are supposed to bring joy, laughter, and thrilling adventures. But for one family visiting the World Carnival in Busan, South Korea on August 13, 2007, their fun day turned into a nightmare that no one could have ever anticipated. It all started with a simple ride on the Ferris wheel, a towering 66-meter structure that promised a peaceful, scenic view of the park. But what they didn't know was that this ride would soon be the most terrifying experience of their lives. As the Ferris wheel turned, the family was seated in one of the compartments, oblivious to the horror that was about to unfold. Suddenly, the wheel stopped unexpectedly, leaving the compartment dangling mid-air. The weight of the passengers caused the glass window to crack under pressure. Without warning, 5 members of the family plunged to the ground from a height of about 20 meters, falling to their deaths. Only 2 of the passengers managed to cling on, surviving the horror. The tragedy was caused by a single improperly installed screw, a tiny component that led to the catastrophic failure of the entire system. The screw had blocked the mechanism that was supposed to keep the cabin in a vertical position during rotation. A simple oversight with deadly consequences. The ride, which was meant to be an innocent fun experience, became a gruesome scene of death and devastation. The police investigation revealed that no one at the park had been arrested or held accountable for the fatal error. The ride's failure was a result of negligence and shoddy maintenance, and yet no one paid the price. This haunting tragedy raises a crucial question: how many more lives will be lost before amusement parks take safety seriously? For the family who lost 5 members in that horrific fall, it was a reminder that even the simplest rides can turn deadly when corners are cut and safety is ignored. The Chimera Tragedy 2019, a roller coaster's deadly past. Imagine being on a ride that looks exciting, but deep down it's a ticking time bomb. That was the reality for those who climbed aboard the Chimera roller coaster at La Feria Amusement Park in Mexico in 2019. Originally built in 1984, this coaster had already experienced a troubled past before it ever made its way to Mexico. And when the ride malfunctioned in the most horrifying way, it revealed the terrifying secrets hidden beneath its shiny exterior. The Chimera was a legend in its own right, a triple-loop roller coaster that had thrilled riders around the world. But in September 2019, disaster struck. The last car of the ride derailed, crashing into a metal structure and falling to the ground from a height of 9 meters. 2 young men were killed instantly, while 2 women were seriously injured. The cause: it wasn't just a freak accident, it was a failure in the ride's design coupled with years of poor maintenance. The train was moving at an excessive speed, and the ride had been overhauled multiple times, but it was never properly rebuilt from scratch. Parts from different rides had been pieced together to form the Chimera, creating a Frankenstein of a coaster that was doomed from the start. But the chilling truth doesn't stop there. The Chimera had been sold and rebuilt multiple times, first in Germany, then Malaysia, and finally London before making its way to Mexico. Each time it was moved, it was patched up but never fully re-engineered. And after the deadly accident, what did the park do? They didn't tear it down. They simply moved it to another park, continuing to expose innocent riders to the same dangerous risks. This story raises the haunting question: how many more rides like the Chimera are still out there lurking in amusement parks, ready to claim more victims? Despite the tragedy, the ride was allowed to continue operating. The Cobra Ride Disaster 2022, trapped in a roller coaster's deadly grip. Sometimes it's the rides you least expect that end up costing lives. The Cobra at Tivoli Friheden in Denmark promised a thrilling experience with its 25-meter height and 70 kilometers per hour speed. But on a fateful day in 2022, what was supposed to be an exciting day of fun quickly became a tragic nightmare. On that day, the last 2 seats of the Cobra roller coaster derailed, slamming into the ride's railings and trapping the passengers in a nightmarish position. The screams of the riders echoed through the park as they were helplessly stuck, unable to move. When rescuers finally arrived, they discovered the shocking truth: one of the passengers, a 14-year-old girl, had tragically died, while her 13-year-old companion was left seriously injured. The cause of this disaster: a mechanical failure. Something that should have never happened on a ride designed for fun. This wasn't the first time the Cobra had caused concern. Just a few years earlier, in 2008, a similar incident occurred. Back then, 4 passengers suffered bone fractures and concussions, but the park did nothing to shut the ride down. They brushed it off and allowed the dangerous ride to continue operating. It's chilling to think that despite these earlier warnings, the park allowed this tragedy to happen. What does it take for an amusement park to take action and prioritize safety for the 14-year-old girl who lost her life that day, and for the countless others who've been hurt on rides like the Cobra? The answer is painfully clear. The pursuit of thrills can quickly turn deadly when safety takes a back seat, and no one should have to pay that price. The Jetline Disaster 2023, when fun turns to tragedy. Amusement parks are meant to be filled with joy, but for the unsuspecting visitors of the Jetline roller coaster in Sweden, the day turned into a nightmare. Known for its impressive 30-meter height and speeds of 90 kilometers per hour, the Jetline had been thrilling visitors for years until the unthinkable happened on a summer's day in 2023. With 14 passengers on board, everything seemed fine as the ride started its usual loop. But without warning, the first car of the train uncoupled from the rest and derailed, sending the train crashing off the tracks. The chaos was instantaneous. While 4 people were miraculously unharmed, 9 others were seriously injured, and 2 passengers were thrown to the ground from a height of 9 meters. Tragically, one 35-year-old woman did not survive the fall. The cause, a mechanical failure, the uncoupling of the first car from the train, a malfunction that should never have happened. The park, which had long boasted about the safety of its rides, had failed to properly inspect and maintain Jetline. The same ride that had been an icon of the park's attraction was now a deadly reminder of the consequences of neglect. What makes this even more terrifying is the fact that the Jetline had been in operation for years without a major incident until that fateful day. It raises the unsettling question: how many more accidents will it take before amusement parks take maintenance and safety seriously? While the park eventually shut down the ride after the tragedy, the damage was done. The Jetline disaster serves as a chilling reminder that the line between thrilling fun and deadly danger is thinner than we think. The Knott's Berry Farm Tragedy 2001. A family day turned fatal. Amusement parks are supposed to be fun, a place where families create happy memories. But for Lori Mason Lors and her children, a fun day at Knott's Berry Farm in California turned into an unimaginable tragedy. On September 21, 2001, Lori and her family were invited to a private party at the park, looking forward to a day of laughter and excitement. But one ride, the perilous plunge, would forever change their lives. The ride, standing 37 meters tall, was designed to give riders the ultimate thrill, rising high, before sending them plummeting at 80 kilometers per hour into a pool below. Lori, who was 177 centimeters tall and weighed 128 kilograms, noticed that the safety belts seemed a bit short, but she decided to ride anyway. Despite the warning signs, her 12-year-old daughter helped secure her in place, and they all set off for what should have been an ordinary plunge.